fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst, Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back into another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm sitting down with Keith Myers. I'm Bill Alvstad. Welcome to the show, Keith. Good morning.
Good morning. Got my coffee, got all my stuff ready. Let's talk some free agency.
Yeah, let's do it. So we're going to set all the fun rookie stuff aside for this show and get you guys all set up for free agency coming this week, starting Monday with the legal tampering period, whatever, and the Wednesday official signing day begins. And as you know perfectly well, Keith, in the past, the Seahawks have kind of avoided the first couple days of free agency, allowed the market to settle in a little bit, and then picked up their quote unquote value free agents later on in the days and weeks following. So just before we get started with going down the path of evaluating all the position groups and free agents available out there, let's set this thing up a little bit and talk about how you view the market overall, how it's changed for the Seahawks in the last 48 hours, 72 hours, whatever it is, and where we're sitting with the salary cap and what you anticipate the Seahawks might try to do.
Well, I mean, things have changed greatly because of the Russell Wilson and trade and the Bobby Wagner release. The team now has more money to spend because of the Bobby Wagner part. They've now got a massive hole in their roster at quarterback. So they went from looking like minor players where they're going to, just sit out the first few days, get some value players, some younger guys, some things that will fill out the middle part of the roster. And now they're looking like perhaps someone that is willing to go make a splash or two. And that's not a spot where they've usually been. They've usually avoided the free agency splashes because they're expensive and they rarely seem to work out for the new team. And there's still a chance. I don't know that they can completely kick their overall philosophy out the window as they approach this. I don't anticipate paying like the top free agent guard or center available or the best wide receiver available, etc. Even edge rusher, possibly. But instead, try to find younger free agents, in their mid to early late 20s, and accumulate a lot of depth and then fill that out with the draft. They do have a lot of their own free agents that they could turn to as well. We can talk about that a little bit and that kind of strategy. I know early before all of this, the trade and the release of Bobby Wagner happened, there was talk from Pete Carroll directly about wanting to retain as many of their free agents as possible. I don't know if that strategy is now completely changed, given the team would likely want to get younger and so forth. I'm not sure if anybody in particular gets crossed off the list, for example. Let's just say it's Diggs. Do they want to spend the money on Diggs now? I think that they probably do. He's young enough and they could build a really nice secondary around him. So he still may be a guy that I would definitely consider the Seahawks wanting to retain. Outside of that, Keith, on our own free agents like Sidney Jones, for example, and maybe you can talk a little bit about Gerald Everett and maybe the player we got from Denver impacting that and so far. Well, I mean, Gerald Everett was an important part of the offense this last year. Very productive receiver, reasonably okay blocker. Played 65% of the snaps in Seattle's offense. So
for a tight end, that's pretty good. But going and getting, Noah Fant, who was a first-round pick, he's 25. He's a more athletic version of Gerald Everett, who's younger and cheaper, and and also a guy that plays a lot. He played 78% of the snaps for Denver last year, so he's a guy that the team can depend on. He becomes the starter. He becomes the best tight end on the roster currently, just by his acquisition. And I don't think the team needs to go spend the money on a guy like Gerald Everett unless his price tag just drops considerably.
So let's talk about a few of the other Seahawks free agents, and I'm just going to go run down the list a little bit. Maybe you can stop me when you want to talk about one of these guys. Dwayne Brown, Quandre Diggs, just talked about Everett, Brandon Shell, Ethan Posik, Rashad Penny, Al Woods, Sidney Jones, Geno Smith, Alex Collins, Robert Kimdichie, Ryan Neal's exclusive rights, Kyle Fuller restricted, Rasheem Green, Phil Haynes is restricted. Let's see, everything else is kind of that's unrestricted. Will Disley, DJ Reid, Jamarco Jones. So that's kind of the unrestricted list.
Yeah. So the there's a whole group of exclusive rights free agents that basically, if the team wants them, they stay. They stay for the minimum that becomes, John Reid, Penny Hart, Brian Monet. Those guys will be back. The restricted guys, for the most part, require a minimum tender that you have to give them, which is usually around $2 million for the 1 year. And I'm looking at the restricted guys and I'm like, okay, find me one that's worth a tender. Kyle Fuller certainly isn't.
Yeah. I don't think at this point Phil Haynes is either.
Phil Haynes hasn't.
But he's right there, but I think that they can cut him and re-sign him. I don't know if anybody else is going to be beating the door down for him.
Yeah, they'll let him reach free agency and then try and re-sign him for less. Bless Austin's the same way. So I don't see
Kyle Fuller is gone.
He's got to be, or if he isn't, he's certainly not getting paid the restricted tender. He'll end up in free agency and then come back on a, on a minimum deal.
So let's talk about the unrestricted guys for just a minute. How about Sidney Jones? What do you think about Sidney Jones?
I mean, Sidney Jones
he's only 26 years old too.
He is. He's a guy he's 26. He played pretty well for Seattle and came over, at the end of, right at the beginning of the season, after training camp, after the preseason, he came over in that time period. And so it took him a little bit to get on the field. But once he did, he wasn't like a standout. Like, oh my God, he was great. But he certainly was steady and played well. The biggest knock on him throughout his career is his inability to stay healthy. And that wasn't really an issue.
Yeah. I think he's going to be an inexpensive option for the Seahawks to sign, especially if DJ Reid is not able to be re-signed. It would give them at least an option of a guy that's familiar with the system.
Yeah, I could see Sidney Jones returning.
How about the two offensive linemen? That's the big question. Brandon Shell and Ethan Posik, both are middling guys. We know that.
And Dwayne Brown.
And Dwayne. So, what do we do there? There's three starters. It's hard to move on from that. But here we are in a rebuild. Now you've really got options.
They've already replaced Shell with Jake Curran. He came in and was an upgrade last year. He's younger. He's cheaper. He actually has some upside.
I don't feel like anybody's really talking about that and giving him any credit for what he did and earning the spot. I feel like everyone's still thinking that we need to bring in either a high-end draft pick or some sort of veteran to compete with him.
Well, and that wouldn't be a bad idea to bring in. I mean, he was a guy who was an undrafted rookie last year. And so, he had 6 games where he looked good as a run blocker and struggled a bit as a pass blocker. Although I think, his reputation with that is a little overblown. But are you going to trust that going forward as your only option? And I think that having someone else there to compete with him is not a bad idea. Or if nothing else, they need depth. They need someone other than him as a possible. What if he gets hurt? You know what I mean?
We've talked extensively about Abraham Lucas in this draft coming in and being available and playing right tackle. That would not be a bad thing, and then go back to being the starter in 2020.
Well, and then they've also got Stone Forsythe, who has that, he's like as far as his measurables and all of that, he's a prototype for left tackle. What he isn't is a run blocker, which I know it will be tough for Seattle because they want to run the ball, especially now that they don't have a quarterback. But he is a guy that has the physical skills. They need to teach him technique, and they've got to fix some things as far as his run blocking and his inability to get low enough to get leverage and things like that. But they've got a guy who looks like he could be a swing tackle on the roster and may develop into a left tackle. So they've got those two guys are your tackles. They're the ones that are on the roster, and having someone who could be a swing tackle, play both, especially if you're going to go in with those two, thinking that those two might be your starters, you got to get some depth. You've got to get someone who can come in and help and fix some of that. Because if Forsythe isn't ready, you're just going to get whoever's playing quarterback killed.
Now that we've moved on from Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner, and it looks like a complete rebuild. And we just don't know the philosophy of which way the team's going to go. They're either going to try to reset this very quickly in either a 1 or 2 year deal or full rebuild where it's more like 3 or 4 years. I would anticipate the former. What do you do with? I'm gonna mention 3 or 4 players here, and then you can talk about them. DJ Reid, Will Disley, and Diggs and Dwayne Brown. What do we do with those guys? Those are guys that have been starters or significant rotation guys.
So Dwayne Brown, starting left tackle, 37 years old, gonna need a fairly big contract. He won't be around when this team is ready to compete again 2 years from now. He'll be 39 at that point. I think you let him walk and thank him for his service. And
that wasn't the case a week ago.
No. A week ago, you re-sign him to a 1 or 2 year deal, and you basically try and keep your quarterback happy. And then you start making sure that you have someone behind him in case he gets hurt and starts to break down. But now there's really just no reason to keep him.
Even on the 1 or 2 year rebuild reset thing?
Because you are, even in a 2 year reset, right? He'll be 39 at that point.
We can go look at the tackle market too when we get into the other free agents available out there. And
his injury history throughout his entire career has been a guy that hasn't been able to stay healthy for a full season and all of that. And at 39, he's not going to be a guy that you want to be relying on.
No, but at 36 this year, it could be a 1 year just placeholder.
He's 37 right now. And
true.
he did play 98% of the snaps for Seattle. This was one of his best years as far as staying healthy.
And they kept him out of training camp and all that stuff to kind of help him along. So
yeah, but it was
out of practice every week.
It was not his best year as far as performance on the field.
No, allowing 9 sacks. That's not good. Okay, yeah, so let's go on to the other guys.
So Quandre Diggs at 29. If they want a 2 year reset, I think you bring him in and you try and bring him back because he's kind of the guy that you want. He's
a glue piece.
Yeah, he's a guy. They want to be more. They want to be more versatile at safety, where they can roll people up and back and do some certain things. And he's exactly what you want for that.
Exactly.
And at 29, he'll be 31. He'll still be in his, in his prime. When they want to compete again,
and he has a lot of
good years with him.
And he has a lot of teaching ability. If we do a too high deal, he can be back there with somebody bringing him along, and then whoever mentored can take his place. Okay, so what do we do at the tight end position? with.
So this is we already talked about Everett. I think they let Everett walk, and I think they try and bring Disley back because I don't know if there's going to be any market for him.
I do too, and he's 26 years old, and he's the team's primary blocking tight end.
Yeah,
and he's going to be inexpensive.
He's going to be very inexpensive, and he is an incredible blocker. I know there's been a lot of hope that he can recapture some of the magic that he had in his first 4 or 5 games, which also spanned 2 major injuries as far as a receiver. But I don't know if we're going to ever see that. But what we've got is a guy that you can line up in line and protect a tackle and just be really good as a run and pass blocker. And there's more value in that than fans seem to recognize. And he's just a really good piece to have on the roster. And if you can get him for practically nothing, why wouldn't you, especially at his age?
Yeah. I think he's available for 1.2 to 1.5 million a year. That's a little over, minimum plus a little bit of guaranteed money. Get him on a 3-year deal. He's happy. Team's happy. All right. DJ Reid.
DJ Reid is an interesting one because this is a guy who's 26, been very good when he's played. He was kind of a revelation. They never really expected him to be that good, but he has been. You don't really want to lose him because you don't have much at cornerback if he's gone. But at the same time, you are in a position where he is going to be expensive and you're in the middle of a scheme change. And does he match what you want to do schematically with the new scheme? And I mean, he's not a guy who's tall. He's not a guy who's long. And he's, kind of sticky in coverage, but again, just he's not a prototype as far as, the measurables. And so what do you
and I think the market's, he's looking at an $8 million to $10 million a year market for him. Which is coveted out there. Great. I understand that. I get that. For teams that are set, for teams that are a few pieces away, that's a good signing. For a team that's going through a complete thing and you've got the scheme changes, like you mentioned, he is young. That's going for him, but he's got 1 year basically of production. And the team has significant needs all over the place. So with that said, I'm not sure if it all aligns really well. Now you go let him test the market. Maybe it's not as strong as everyone thinks, and he can come back on a 2-year, $7 million deal or something. That maybe would be realistic for the Seahawks. But we'll see, because if they don't sign him and then Sidney Jones goes someplace else, Seahawks are starting all over with their corner room, and which is maybe okay, but
especially if Diggs walks in free agency and hopefully they're trying to trade Jamal Adams. I mean, you can look at having of your 4 defensive backs having 4 new starters next year, and that's a rebuild. You want to talk about a rebuild? That's right? A rebuild.
Right. That is a rebuild. I don't know that that's necessarily something that you'd want to do. You want veterans in the building to help mentor your young players at certain positions, and you've got to have somebody in that defensive backfield somewhere along the line that's going to be able to do that. Now, it could be a new player to the Seahawks. So let's talk about free agency.
Okay.
Currently, the Seahawks are sitting at $50 million cap space. Likely, maybe not completely done there with attaining cap space, either by some restructures or additional releases. We just don't know that yet. But let's go into this. So that's the cap space. Let's talk about the market. Obviously, Seattle now has holes all over the place, really. We can start at quarterback, but, tight end is empty. The offensive line now at running back. Defensive tackle, linebacker now, defensive end. We've talked about that needing speed, and edge rushers and the entire secondary. I mean, literally, we could talk about every position. Let's talk about every position, Keith, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through the entire position group. Let's start with quarterback. Okay. What's the market look like for Seattle? Not the trade market. We can talk a little bit about that if you want.
I don't. I think we should save that for another show. The free agent market is just empty. You're looking at Teddy Bridgewater, Andy Dalton, maybe Mitchell
Jameis Winston.
Trubisky, Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota. That's the free agent, which not a single one of those people should be brought in to be a starter. So I mean but that is who you're looking at as your guys. Are any of those a significant upgrade over Drew Lock? Which
none of those are a significant upgrade over Geno Smith, let alone Lock or anybody else. I mean, right? I'm not exaggerating.
I mean, Geno Smith is also a free agent, so at this point, you let him walk.
But what I'm saying is, are any of those names that we just mentioned significant enough for the Seahawks to go out and sign some middling level quarterback contract? Let's just say it's $8 million a year as an example, instead of just bringing Geno back and let him be the placeholder for a year. He knows the system. He knows Shane Waldron. He knows the offense. He performed well in one of the 3 games that he was in last year. That's all we expect somebody to come in and win anyway, is one of 3 games next year, regardless of if it's Mariota or Winston or Bridgewater. Any of these veterans are only going to win 1 out of 3 games with the roster we have.
Yeah.
So what do you do?
I would say that I wouldn't touch a single one of them, and I would just run with Drew Lock and let him lose. We know he's not good.
And Jacob Eason is on the roster too, just FYI.
Yeah. But like I said, we know he's not good. You know, he's going to lose a lot of games, but so is every other player we've mentioned. So why not we've got the guy on
and you bring Geno back maybe to be the backup or to be the starter, compete with Drew Lock to be the starter. Just roll with that. Maybe pick one in the draft. Maybe not at 9. Maybe you pick a guy at 40 or whatever. That would be interesting to me. I'm not afraid of this strategy anymore. It's a nightmare strategy for somebody that woke up in Seahawks land last week, but this week that's our reality, right? And so I would be okay with not expending any sort of capital on any one of those players that we mentioned. There's a couple of players in the trade market. That's a really crappy market too, and so and we'll talk about the quarterbacks in the draft in episodes to come, but this is just not good. I don't even know that it's worthy of continuing to have a conversation, because I just think that it's empty. If
they're gonna, rather than bringing back Geno, who is older, and we know from watching him last year, it was brutally bad.
With tinges of fun moments. He had one great game where he was really nice, and a few drives intermittent
against Jacksonville, which was just a pathetic defense all year, and against the 2 teams that were not playoff teams but were in that mix near the end. He looked terrible. I mean, we go. If you're going to bring in a guy to just be a placeholder and lose a lot of games, I would say, why not go look at a guy like Josh Rosen, who was the 16th overall pick, and he's bounced around a little bit, never really found a home and a chance. And he's an unrestricted free agent out there. You could probably have him for half what you're going to have to pay.
He's been tossed around so much. I hope that he's spent the last 6 months in a therapy chair, because that's what he has needed to do, is get his head right, because what a tough deal. Okay,
so
we'll come back to that. That conversation, I think, as it kind of develops and we understand possibly which direction the Seahawks are thinking. Let's do the wide receivers really quick, because I think it's going to be a fairly short conversation, because I'm just not exactly sure if there's a huge need out there. Devontae Adams was franchised. Chris Godwin was franchised right away. Mike Williams got a new contract. Those were kind of the top 3 available early in free agency, are now off the market. Allen Robinson's sitting there. Odell Beckham Jr., Michael Gallup. None of those players are players that Seattle would consider. We've already got our top 2 guys. But they may take a look at a player, let's just say like Christian Kirk, for example, where he's more of a slot guy, age 25 and a half. He can give you some return availability and some vertical threat. A guy like that might be interesting to have on your roster, just because of the age and the upside. And it's a position of need, I think, on the Seahawks.
See, and the guy that I was kind of looking at as a 1 year flyer with nothing guaranteed, so you're not out anything if it doesn't work out, would be John Ross. Was a first round pick, one of the fastest 40 times in the combine history. Might actually be the fastest 40 time in combine history, if I remember right.
4.22.
Only 27, can't stay healthy, has not done a single thing on 2 different teams during his time in the NFL, but he's from the area. He went to the University of Washington, willing to come in on an absolute minimum, nothing deal, and play for an opportunity to stay in the league. I would definitely do that, and as a guy that you could bring in and see what you've got and roll with that, because especially at his age, there's upside with that speed and all of that.
Right. Yeah.
It's worth
You're definitely not going to bring guys in like AJ Green or T.Y. Hilton or anything like that. I think you stay away from those aged veteran players and you try to find upside. Sammy Watkins is out there. Zay Jones is another guy that you could have kind of as a number 3 option, possibly. And we can also look in-house as well. We've got a really nice piece there. He didn't have a lot of playing time this last year, and we'll see what he's got this year. All right. So how about
running? How about running back? Because
let's do running back, because that's definitely a need.
Because the Seahawks have a couple of guys which have kind of shown they're not guys that are going to run up the middle for you on the roster, and a guy that can't stay healthy and is coming off a major neck injury and neck surgery. That's it. And so
and could be a release situation.
Absolutely. And I would kind of be surprised if he's on the roster at the beginning of camp. But then you go and you look at, okay, well, what's the market look like? There's a lot of guys that are older that probably aren't going to have a significant time left in terms of their time in the NFL, because running back just eats people up. But you got Rashad Penny sitting there. He's probably the best young guy that's available.
What does a contract look for you like?
For Penny?
Yeah.
2 year, $2.5 million with 1 guaranteed.
Yeah, I was thinking 3 million. Yeah, and right in that range.
Yeah,
I think that's about right.
Leonard Fournette might be a name that you look at 27. He's also coming off of a fairly major injury, so maybe you can have him on a prove it deal, for cheaper. But go look at the rest of the market. You're not going to find. I mean, Ronald Jones down in Tampa.
James Conner.
Yeah, I don't know. He looked good at the beginning of the year and then really just kind of ran out of gas for most of the season. So I'm not sure that
and injury history
that I would go. Yeah.
Right. How about Sonny Michel?
No, I wouldn't.
Not a good fit in this scheme.
No,
I mean, he was with the Rams around the same scheme.
Yeah, and they needed other pieces.
Melvin Gordon was always a player that I thought would be a good scheme fit in Seattle. A guy that Pete Carroll would like, not necessarily Shane Waldron, but Pete Carroll would like, because he's a tackle breaker. He's a guy that can break tackles. In fact, he's one of the league leaders in that department. But he's more of a committee guy. He's not going to give you anything. He'll give you a little bit of receiving, but he's not that. He's more of an early down guy.
Yep. Okay. He's a guy that, especially he's 29. He played a lot last year. If his market starts to dry up and is available, I would, take a flyer on him.
Yeah, I would, for me, I would solve this with Rashad Penny and 1 or possibly 2 picks in the draft, or 1 solid pick in the draft, maybe in the top 100, and then unrestricted guys and had just guys come in and compete.
The other part that I would look in this is we've got, you do have DJ Dallas, and you have a change in scheme ish. They're going from an inside zone focus to an outside zone focus, and you have a guy like that who is a better fit for an outside zone scheme. So maybe he fits more into their plans than people are thinking. You watch him play and you're like, it's not all that exciting. But then, with this better scheme fit, it might be something that you could roll with.
I think we can skip over the tight ends. I honestly think Will Disley's coming back. We've got Noah Fant and Parkinson already on the roster. I think that's pretty well going to be set. I think they bring in a couple of undrafted guys and they go into the season with that. Let's go to the offensive line. You want to start at center or guard, tackle?
I'll start at tackle. Because I'm looking at the tackle market and I'm not overly like, ooh, let's go sign any of these guys.
How about Teron Armstead?
He's the guy who is, especially, coming off an injury. He's only 31, but has been very good for the Saints when he's been out there. Basically, he would be an upgrade over Dwayne Brown, both in terms of overall play at this stage.
He's going to be expensive.
Longer.
I think he's going to be. I think he's going to be like an $18 million guy.
Yeah.
And I don't know. We do have $50 million. And if you're going to throw money, you're going to throw money at left tackle, elite corner, premier edge rusher. That's where you're going to spend your money in this.
Yeah.
It's free agency.
It's hard to look at this group and say, hey, here's the guy that you go throw money at.
And the guy that you liked prior to this whole thing was Cam Robinson, and he was franchised.
Yeah.
And then Orlando Brown was franchised as well.
So you can also look at
Eric Fisher, maybe.
Yeah, God, yes and no. He's been such a disappointment just over and over again.
Yeah.
And I would say even once he started to like, hey, maybe he's figured some stuff out and gotten better, and then he got hurt, and so I don't know if you just go down that road at this point.
Yeah, here's the situation where I think you try to possibly sign Brown, which is not a horrible thing. Still do a 1-year deal for Brown at $10 million or ish, and go draft a guy and kind of roll with maybe a later round pick as well to kind of bring in and develop. And then that's it. And then, you're going to look at a center possibly. We'll talk about that in a second. I think we're okay at guard, maybe a rotational kind of guard. I don't know. There's just, where do you upgrade the team if you've got all this money to spend is what I'm saying when there's really lackluster players available.
Well, that's the thing is the defensive side of the ball has more for us when we get there to look at.
Let's get through how about
we center? I would say, we have talked about them needing a swing tackle, a guy that's not a starter, but you can bring in and he can play both and he's available on game day. Bobby Massey might be a guy that you look at for that. So for people who are looking for a name. Okay. But now to look at center, this is a situation where the team needs help at center. They don't have anyone on the roster that's actually on the roster. They've got a couple of guys that they could bring back, but I don't know if you care enough to do so. I look at this and I'm like, okay, so who do you have that's out there? There's a guy that Seattle might actually like more now than they did a year ago, and that would be Justin Britt. Remember him? Who is available to come back again, and that might be an interesting fit for him to come in.
I like a guy better. I think it would be perfect. Would be Brian Allen.
Yeah,
from the Rams now, age 26 and a half. He's started in this scheme. He knows the lingo, and he can come right in and have an immediate impact. And you could even overpay for him to make sure you get him in free agency. And I think that would be a piece that you could carry forward in a rebuild that would last.
If you're going to do that, is he an upgrade over Ethan Posik?
Yes.
You think so?
Yes.
I think it's pretty much a wash. And so I would just base on price.
Just, I'm going to do Pro Football Focus just because I have access. Pro Football Focus has Ethan Posik ranked 194. They have Brian Allen ranked 68 overall prospect, not just center group, overall prospect. So, that's kind of where they think they're ranked. Okay. And he had 1,181 snaps last year with a 74.8 overall grade, which was ranked 10th out of 39 qualifying centers in the NFL.
Yeah.
And let's see where Ethan Posik was at. Ethan Posik had a 67.3 grade, was ranked 15th out of the 39 centers, but he only played less than half the year, 600 snaps. And the year prior, he was almost dead last, ranking in 1,000 snaps at 59.8 grade. So, I mean, there is an upgrade there. Austin Blythe would be another guy, Kansas City, with a low level contract, age 30, that could come in and kind of be your placeholder if that's the direction that you're moving. But he would be a scheme fit.
Yeah, Billy Price is another one from the Giants.
All right. So you want to talk about guards? Or you want to move to the defense?
Let's move to the defense, because right now I don't see the team needing a guard. They've got both their starters, and unless they go and they make a move to and trade a guy like Jackson now that Wilson's gone, they don't need one. So
I agree. All right. How about interior defenders?
Okay, so we start looking at defensive players, defensive line. This is a team that needs some help there. I personally think they're going to solve that in the draft, but yeah, going after guys. Malik Collins comes to mind. Maybe Vernon Butler as guys that can be interior defensive tackles that can come out and be helpful and are young enough that are still going to be around. I'd kind of kick the tires on Solomon Thomas. I know he's been a disappointment in first in San Francisco and then with Vegas, but he was a first round pick for a reason. There's some athleticism there. There's some upside. He's a guy that I would let's kick the tires on and see.
You know who I would kick the tires on?
Who? Maurice
Hurst.
Okay.
I think he's going to be cheap. He's 27 years old, 49ers, I think second round draft pick in 2018. Didn't work out. Was injured his very first year, didn't play at all. Came in. He had some snaps in 2019, 522 snaps. He had a 73.1 grade, 29th out of 116 interior defensive linemen. In 2020, he had 277 snaps before he got injured with a 77.9 grade, 19th overall defensive tackle, and then 71 grade this last year, only 41 snaps, hurt again. He's a guy that's just been injured, but those injuries are deemed non-relatable, they weren't related to each other. Maybe just take a flyer on a guy like that and have him come in and compete, because he does have some upside, and when he does play, he plays well. I don't know. Other than that, Keith, the market, I mean, you'd have to go out and spend a little bit of money in this market. Hakeem Hicks is sitting there if you want a mentor guy to come in and kind of be really good for your defense and B, actually play well and have an impact on your line. But he's definitely older. He's going to be 30. Well, he won't be 33 before the season end, like next year, but really close. Calais Campbell's out there. But I don't know if he's a good scheme fit for this defense.
Actually, if they go towards more of a 3-4, he becomes a good scheme fit. Because what he becomes is your 5 tech or your 3.
But he'll be 36 years old by October.
True, and that's why I don't think that I didn't bring him up. Who actually is a great fit is Shelby Harris.
Yeah.
The guy they just traded for.
That's funny.
And so he's going to come in and with the team making this shift towards a more of a 3-4 alignment, what you're going to see is, you need a nose tackle. Well, they've kind of got that, with the 2 defensive tackles that they've got on the roster. And then as far as defensive ends go, when you're a 3-4, defensive ends have to be bigger. Shelby Harris becomes a guy that fits in there well. And, it's just they're in a situation where they kind of don't need it as much if they make this shift. They're not really, when they stay in a 4, if they were to stay in the 4-3, the scheme they've ran the last few years, man, they need a 3 tech badly. But I don't think they do. And so I think that they're in good shape kind of where they're at if they switch more to a 3-4. And honestly, I think that Rasheem Green's market might not be as lucrative as he wants it to be, and he might be available to come back. And he's a guy he was.
I agree.
Last year.
He'd be a great rotation with Harris. Shelby Harris.
Just a good fit in the scheme and in Seattle. And if he's young, and if they can get him on a contract that's not excessive, I'd absolutely do it.
How about on the other side, a guy like that can play strong side, Leo type stuff, Emmanuel Agba, Hassan Reddick. What would you think of those two players? I mean, the primary driver, I think, in this offseason is to get fast, get speed, get edge guys that can get to the quarterback. We just didn't have enough of that. I think that's going to be a focus.
Hassan Reddick would be fun.
I think so too. He's a little undersized, but he's never been asked to be a true linebacker. I think you put him up to the close to the line of scrimmage and let him go. Agba, I'm intrigued in, just because I've always been intrigued with this guy since he came into the draft. He's going to come into his own now with Miami, age 28. I think he'd be a solid starter.
Yeah, I would also. I mean, especially if you can get him on the cheap. Tack McKinley. Talk about a guy who's been kind of a disappointment throughout his career. I mean, he was a first-round pick who kind of did nothing for the Falcons, moved on to the Browns. But man, the guy's just got wheels. And it's like, okay, can you get something out of him? And so why not take a flyer on a guy that has all that athleticism, even though he doesn't have the production, and see if you can scheme around what he does well and turn him into a more productive player. Like,
would you throw money? Would you spend the most money for any free agent, considering how much money we've got, on a guy like Harold Landry? I'm just really curious about this because he's a unique player that's really kind of taken a little bit of time to come into his own in the NFL. But he's only
26.
He's 26. He's looking at probably a $4 million or a 4-year, $15 million a year type of deal. He's that kind of a level, but he'd be perfect in this adjusted scheme where we're running more 3-4 principles on the outside linebackers type stuff and come up and rush the passer. I think that he could be a guy that they probably have on their radar.
Oh, absolutely. Of all the guys that they might spend money on, he's the guy I'd look at because I think he would be a fantastic fit.
And then what would you do with what's our guy's name? Older guy.
Carlos Dunlap. I'd trade him.
What would you do for? Yeah. Okay.
I'd find a home for him, get a draft pick for him. Because he's older, he's got a year left. He's not going to be a guy that's going to be here as a major contributor once a rebuild is done. Move on, go get younger, and actually, quite frankly, better. And with that move, and I'd do that in a second.
So let's talk about the linebacker market. And I didn't even think that we would have this conversation
me neither.
This last week. Guess who's the number 1 ranked linebacker available in free agency?
Bobby Wagner.
Bobby Wagner. Yeah. 13th overall player available in the but he's, Pro Football Focus has him projected to have a contract of 1 year, $8 million. And I'm just curious as if he doesn't find any, from what I understand, he's got 12 or 13 suitors out there that are like wanting to. So I don't think his market's going to be a problem. I think he's going to get more than that. I think he's probably going to get like a 2 or 3 year, $12 million a year deal still. He's only 31 and a half.
Yeah. I mean, he's slowed down. He's got some knee issues and he's definitely slowed down. So teams that are signing him have to know that, but they do know that. It's pretty obvious on the tape, but you're still getting a guy who has been in the top 3 in tackles every year of his career, but one. I think he was in the top 3, and this last year, even missing the last 2 games. I mean, just a fantastic player. locker room presence that is like fantastic and great for everyone there. True leader on the team, all pro in so many different ways. He's worth more than just being a middle linebacker who's going to make a lot of tackles, and he's going to find a market. He's going to have a market. And would I love to have him back in Seattle? Absolutely. Especially if they're going to more of a 3-4 and you need 2 interior linebackers and you could leave him next to Brooks. I'd love that, but it's not going to happen. He's going to go get a chance to go play for a contender, not play for a team that's in the middle of a rebuild. And honestly, go for it. I would totally be okay.
Is there anybody else in this?
Him win elsewhere?
Anyone else in this market that intrigues you at all? I mean, Van Der Esch is out there.
He's the one that I like to go say, yeah, probably. I could see that.
He's had some injury issues and hasn't played up to his where they thought that he would land as far as a player, and that's why he's available. Alexander Johnson is another guy with Denver actually this last year, but he's 30 years old. But he would be kind of a scheme diverse middle linebacker, outside linebacker, weak side. So he could kind of float back and forth with you. Be probably matched up pretty well with Brooks. Devondre Campbell is sitting out there. That's it. Yeah, I think you go to the draft.
Damian Wilson, maybe.
There's a couple of really outstanding Tittle. I mean, there's a couple of really athletic middle linebacker types in the draft in the middle rounds that the Seahawks get. And I actually think that that's probably the direction that they go.
Yeah.
Because they draft a guy.
So if we move over to cornerback, we have, there's a lot of guys here that are not necessarily guys that I would think would be great fits, as far as what Seattle wants to do. Kevin King at 27 is probably the best one. And we've watched him get lit up repeatedly in a Packer uniform. And, it's a hard year. I mean, the Seahawks need cornerbacks, but find me one that you're excited about bringing in.
I like Carlton Davis. Okay. I like Carlton Davis from Tampa Bay, age 25. I think he's a number one guy. He's got the size and physical profile that Pete Carroll likes as a shutdown corner on one side of the field. If they're going to run some man this year, it sounds like they are. They need a guy, and a guy like Carlton Davis would be good. And you can find guys too in the draft, but they're not going to have the experience. They have the money to spend. We've already gone through the entire free agency list of players available, and there just isn't a lot. And there's a couple of guys that you could pinpoint, like Landry and maybe Carlton Davis, and then go fill out your roster with everything else. But if they spent the money there, I would not be unhappy. Those are the two position groups I would think that the Seahawks might spend money on in free agency. And a guy like Carlton Davis, to me, would be a guy. And he's got great grades throughout. And I just think that might be the target guy. The other guy is right at the top, CJ Jackson. I think he's going to be really expensive. Yeah. But here's another lockdown kind of corner that's available that's only 26 years old as well. Stefan Gilmore is a placeholder guy that's out there. I don't think the Seahawks go in that direction. We've talked about why, but maybe since their room is completely vacant, if things don't work out as far as signing their own players back, they might want a guy that just has all the experience in the world that they can help teach and mentor.
I think that Sidney Jones is the most likely guy to come back. You might get a placeholder for a year or two on a guy like Eli Apple. I mean, you're not committing a lot of money there. I'm not Carlton Davis. Other than that, I'm not real excited about the free agent class at corner, even though the Seahawks don't have any healthy cornerbacks on the roster. So I'm like, well, what do you do with all of that? So
it seems like we're going to be rolling a lot of money over into 2023,
which is fine because, they're not going to win this year anyway. So roll the money over and use it when you are, because the best thing that they could do this year is lose a lot of games and get themselves in position for a quarterback.
Well, we just lost them a ton of games just by not really being happy with anybody and not signing anything.
Yeah.
We saved them a whole boatload of cash. I would spend the money on Landry and Carlton Davis and maybe an off swing tackle, offensive lineman kind of a guy, or a center, maybe a starting center, and have 3 starters out of free agency. And you've got a little bit of money to fill out, some depth.
We talked about the team maybe paying Quandre Diggs. I would rather see them let Diggs walk and spend the money on Marcus Williams from the Saints, who's 26, so he's 3 years younger. Going to cost a little bit more, but I think he's worth it, and he's younger. He'll still be here and be in his prime when this team is ready to win again.
Yeah, Marcus Williams. I like that, actually. And he's a versatile free safety. I mean, he really does give you some options up and down that back end. And he'd be an upgrade. He would be an upgrade, and Diggs is right there, Pro Bowl level-ish, but Marcus Davis is squarely in that conversation all the time.
The other guy I'd look at would be Xavier Woods, who played with the Vikings last year, 27, and bigger guy, I would like that.
I wouldn't be opposed to bringing Diggs back or have a combination of a guy like Marcus May and Marcus Williams. Because we are going to need 2 premier kind of safeties on the back end, which would be interesting. Or you think, getting one of those guys and then having Marquise Blair or somebody be able to come in and fill that other hybrid role for you, or draft a guy.
Blair, Umadi, Ryan Neal. I think that trio is going to give you one. The bigger thing for me with this is you've got to figure out if you can get Adams off this roster, and because remember, what have we looked through? We've gone through every position. We've like, God, there's just no one that I would jump at spending the money on. Okay, so then don't use the cap room to eat the dead money that you need to get Jamal Adams off the roster, and go that route. I would like. To me, that's a better fit. And then, like I said, go young, go hungry, go give yourself an opportunity to be drafting, in the top 3 overall in the draft a year from now, and go get your quarterback then.
All right. I think we've done enough. I think this is a pretty decent primer, and we've talked about all the position groups. We've talked about what the Seahawks have currently, who they might likely re-sign, who they would let go. I think we'll know more, obviously, next week as far as what the team strategy is, because it'll start to present itself by the type of players that they're going for. And it'll kind of tell us which direction that the team is going to go in 2022. It'll be very interesting. Anything else?
No. Let's it's going to be a weird year. They've got money, but there's not that upper echelon guys available this year, which is a little weird. And so, we'll see what this team does. They're rebuilding, whether they want to or not, because they traded their quarterback and cut their best defensive player. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show can be found on all your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube. Would love more subscribers there. So make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends and family. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.